Welcome to the GAMERamble video review for 1980X, narrated by me, Darkcloud. As always, the full text version of this review can be found on the GAMERamble website linked below. The TLDR is that 1980X pays homage to the arcade scene of the 1980s with 5 different retro games that are all styled around popular classics of that era. The whole package is wrapped up in a narrative about Kid, a teenager who uses these arcade games to escape from some trauma in their personal life. Most of the games in 1980X are really good, but sadly they are very short-lived. Even with the extended narrated scenes, players will be left staring at the credits in less than 2 hours. It's definitely a lot of fun while it lasts, and very nostalgia-inducing for those who still miss the 80s arcade scene. Unfortunately, players looking for retro experiences will find longer and more in-depth titles available elsewhere. Gameplay receives a 6 out of 10. 1980X offers a nice slice of 80s nostalgia with 5 different genres that feel very faithful to the games of that era. Graphics receives an 8 out of 10. The visuals looks much better than games of the 1980s actually looked, but they perfectly capture the feel of these titles. Sound receives a 9 out of 10. The synth soundtrack is great and the narration standard is very high. The overall score for 1980X is 7.7 out of 10. And now for the full review. Thanks to the internet, it's not hard these days to find a community where you feel like you belong. However, things were a little more difficult in the 1980s, as there were no high-speed internet, streaming services, or millions of different ways to stay connected to your friends. 1980X is the story of Kid, a teenager of this era who feels stuck in suburbia just outside the big city. Kids spend their time staring out their bedroom window at the cars heading into the city, or restlessly wandering around the neighborhood, searching for something that can make their hearts skip a beat again. Against all odds, this happens one evening when Kid discovers a seedy arcade that has taken up residence in the basement of what used to be an abandoned factory. Wandering inside, Kid immediately feels at home amongst the coolest of the uncool who hang out in the arcade. From Kid's frequent monologues, it becomes clear that something traumatic changed their family and left Kid lost in their own world while shutting out the outside world. All of this information is conveyed via beautiful pixel art vignettes and excellent narration by Maya Okitato. However, interspersed with all of this are 5 homages to classic arcade games of the 80s. The first of the retro-style games players get to play in 1980X is Beat Hearts, a side-scrolling beat-em-up in the vein of Streets of Rage. Starting at a subway station, players brawl their way through the streets beating up punks with bare-knuckle punches and flashy jump kicks. This is followed by Out of the Void, a horizontally scrolling space shooter that brought back good memories of games like Gradius and R-Type. Next is an Outrun-style arcade racer called The Runaway, complete with traffic to dodge and checkpoints to reach before the time runs out. The retro adventures continues in Shadow Play, an auto-scrolling hack-and-slash game slightly reminiscent of Strider. Players must slice and dice enemies while jumping over or sliding under obstacles. Finally, there's Kill Screen, a first-person turn-based RPG set in a maze where players must battle through random encounters to reach and kill 3 dragons. Each of the 5 retro games in 1980X only lasts a few levels or screens, but players are given unlimited credits to beat them. The great thing about these games is that they look exactly how you would remember 80s arcade games looked, which is quite a bit better than how they actually looked. All of the sprites are very detailed, and the game all features colourful backgrounds. It almost feels like a waste that so much effort has gone into the look and feel of these games, only for them to end abruptly and leave players wanting more. 1980X sounds incredible too, thanks to an excellent synthesizer soundtrack that immediately sets the right tone for the experience. We also really like the use of a speech synthesizer for the creepy voice of the final boss in Kill Screen. We have no complaints about the sound effects either, and Maya does a perfect job capturing the melodramatic angst of a teenager yearning for freedom and meaning in their life. Her voiceovers explain why Kid picks each of the games they're playing, such as The Runaway after seeing a rebellious girl from school speed off in her car and feeling envious of her independence. The games are not always a perfect match, but thematically they all fit together nicely and make for a nice varied selection of genres. 1980X keeps things simple with the controls, as all of the games have a maximum of 2 buttons to worry about. Shadow Play is the most complex, as players can jump, slash and slide, while Kill Screen is the simplest, as players pick a direction to move and select one of 3 attack options when faced with enemies. Players can time their button press after selecting an attack to do more damage, but that's as complicated as it gets. Sadly, while 1980X features excellent presentation, great visuals and a fantastic soundtrack, it's also a very short game, and most players should be able to complete it in less than 2 hours. There are a few achievements for playing the retro games almost flawlessly, but players still have to sit through the narration and cutscenes, which loses a lot of impact after repeated views. Since 1980X is such a nostalgia-driven experience, it will also not appeal to players who are not particularly fond of the 80s or don't have rose-tinted glasses about the era. We thoroughly enjoyed our brief time with 1980X, but the fact that it ends on a to-be-continued screen does sting a little, especially as it's been quite a few years now since the release of the game, and no follow-up or second installment has materialized yet. These days, there's no shortage of good homages to retro games, and players can find full games in the same genres as the ones in 1980X. This makes it a bit hard to recommend what essentially feels like a collection of teasers. However, it's hard to fault the production values of 1980X, and it's clear that a lot of passion was put into creating the game. Players who don't have a lot of free time, or anyone who made their local arcade their second home during the 80s, will get the most out of 1980X, but casual players might be left feeling shortchanged. Thanks for joining me for this 1980X PC review. Remember to like, subscribe and share. Until next time.